For this lesson, we're going to be factoring quadratics using the grouping method. Last week and earlier this week, we solved by using the square root method. So not all problems can be solved by using the square root method. So we're going to use the factoring by grouping method in order for us to solve quadratics this way. But before we solve them, we have to know how to factor them. So that's what we're going to do today. So first, we're going to multiply this 3 on the outside to every term on the inside. So this gives us 3x squared plus 12x plus 24. Notice how each one of these is divisible by 3 because we multiplied it by 3. Today we're going to work backwards. We're going to go from this form to factoring out the GCF, the number that we initially applied. Let's look at the next problem. Here we're going to use double distributive, 2x times x, 2x squared, and this gives us negative 12x. Then we can multiply using the second term, and then 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. We can combine these two. We get 2x squared is negative 11x minus 6. So again, today we're going to go from this form, which is standard form, back to a root intercept form where we're going to be able to solve for our solutions or our zeros to find the solutions. So let's first start with our success criteria. We're going to first factor out the GCF. Now, in order for us to be able to factor out the GCF, we need to know what it is. So let's start with 4. If we find the factors of 4, factors are basically numbers that multiply to give you that number. I like to start in order. So if we start with 1, 1 times 4 gives us 4. Then we continue with 2. 2 times 2 gives us 4. And then when we start repeating the numbers, that's when we know that those are all the factors. Let's try that with 12. We've got 1 times 12. And then 12 divided by 2, and it's 2 times 6. And then 3, we've got 3 times 4. It's not divisible by, it's divisible by 4, and that's when we start repeating, so we can stop. Now, if we look at all the factors, we need to look for the GCF, which is the greatest common factor, and my greatest common factor in this example is 4. So my GCF is equal to 4. Let's factor out the GCF from this one. We look at all 3 terms, and they're all divisible by 3. That's the greatest common factor. So we're going to factor out the 3, put it on the outside of the parentheses, and then we simply divide. 3x squared divided by 3 is x squared. 9x divided by 3 is 3x, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So when we factor out the GCF, we get this answer. Now, if you want to check your answer, we can go back and multiply just like we did in our warm-up. This one here. And we can say 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times 3x is 9x, and 3 times 2 is 6. All right, let's go on to the next one. There's a nice little hint here where if your a or the first number is negative, we want to factor out that negative. So if we look at these 3, we're going to do negative because that first number is negative. And the GCF between 2, 6, and 16 is 2. So we've got negative 2. But if you notice, each one also has an x. So we're going to divide an x from each term as well, which means my greatest common factor is actually negative 2x. Now when you divide these numbers, we first divide our numbers. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. We don't write the 1, but we can write it this time. We get x to the third divided by x. That is x squared. And the reason that is because if we have x to the third divided by x, that means we have 3 x's in the numerator and 1 in the denominator. These two cancel to give us 1, so we end up with 2 left over. And that's where that x squared comes in. Let's go on to the next one. We've got negative 6 divided by negative 2. This is a positive 3, and then x squared divided by x is x. We go 16 divided by negative 2, that's negative 8, and then x divided by x cancel each other out because they're equal to 1. Now let's factor out the GCF from these two terms. We can factor out a 3, and since they both have at least one x, we can factor out an x as well. So my greatest common factor is 3x, and when we factor it out, we go 9 divided by 3 is 3, x squared divided by x is x. 12 divided by 3 is positive 4, x divided by x cancel because they equal to 1. And that's factoring out the GCF. All right, now let's put everything into play. We've got 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. First, we want to see if there is a GCF that we can factor out, and there isn't. So we're going to move on to the next step. Next, we're going to label A, B, and C in terms of the equation, which means that we're going to label it as ax squared plus bx plus c, where your a is 2, your b is 7, and your c is 6. So let's go ahead and go a is 2, b is 7, and c is 6. So now we're going to, the next step is we're going to multiply our a times our c. So we're going to multiply these two, and we get positive 12, put our I, and then B for bottom, that number is going to be at the bottom. So if we look at this number, this sign is very important because this sign tells us what we're going to do to our factors. So because it's a plus sign, we're going to add our factors. So let's look for the factors of 12. We start with 1 and 12. When we add them, they need to equal this bottom number. 1 plus 12 is not 7, so we're going to look for other factors. The next factors we've got is 2 and 6. 2 and 6, when we add them, it does not give us 7, so we can scratch that off. We'll go on to the next factors. Next ones are 3 and 4. If we add those do give us 7. And because we need a positive 7, that means we're going to put a plus sign for each of those factors. So over here, we've got, we're going to set up our equation, 2x squared, positive 6. These two numbers that we got here will be our middle terms, positive 3x, positive 4x. Now, if you remember from our warm-up, right now, these are the two numbers that we got. Those two equaled negative 11. Just like over here in the example that we're doing, these two terms are equal to 7x. All right, so from here, we're going, because we're factoring by grouping, this is where the grouping comes in. We're going to group these two terms together and these two terms together. To eliminate mistakes, this plus sign that divides the two groups will be the plus sign for whatever number we get there. So we're going to factor out the GCF between these two terms, 2 and 3, because they both have 1. We know that this is 1. 1 is a GCF, and then they both have an x, so this is 1x. Between the next two terms, we've got 4x and 6. They both have, or they have a GCF, or greatest common factor, of 2. So that means that's going to be our first, that's going to be our first factor. So x plus 2. Now to find my next factor, we're going to look at the second group, 4x divided by 2. That gives us 2x. And then 6 divided by 2. That gives us a positive 3. Now to double check your work, and I encourage you to do this because it helps with catching mistakes, is we're going to test it, this part, on the first group. So 2x squared divided by 1x, that does give us 2x. And then 3x divided by 1x, that does give us 3. And so I can make you all believers. Let's multiply this again. 2x squared plus 3x plus 4x plus 6. Combine these two, we get 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. And that's exactly the problem that we started off with.